Bernice bobs her hair. There was a Saturday evening dance at the country club, and Warren McIntyre was there. He was a student at Yale and had come home for the summer holidays. It was hot inside, so he went out into the cool night air for a cigarette. He was thinking about Marjorie Harvey. What a girl! With her beauty and her quick, clever tongue, she was popular with everybody. Warren had been crazy about her for a long time. But one day, she had told him,
"I'm sorry, Warren. I don't love you. You see, when I'm away from you, I forget you and go out with other boys. So I know I don't love you."
Marjorie had been away very often this summer. And each time she came home, there were a lot of letters for her on the Harveys' hall table.
These letters must be from the boys she's met,
thought Warren miserably. And now it was August already, and he still couldn't spend time alone with Marjorie, because her cousin Bernice was visiting her for a month. If he wanted to be with Marjorie, he always had to find a boy for Bernice, and that wasn't easy. Everyone agreed that although Bernice was pretty, she was no fun at a party. She had nothing interesting to say. When the two cousins reached Marjorie's house that night, they said goodnight and went to their own bedrooms. As she brushed her teeth, Bernice wondered for the 100th time why she wasn't as popular as the other girls. She decided to talk to Marjorie's mother before going to bed and walked down the hall to her aunt's bedroom. Through the partly open door, she heard her own name and stopped to listen.
"She's hopeless,"
Marjorie was saying.
"I know she's pretty and sweet, and she can cook, but that's not enough. Men don't like her, and that's what matters."
"I think you ought to be able to do something for her,"
Mrs. Harvey said.
"I know her conversation isn't very exciting."
"Exciting?"
cried Marjorie.
"All she can say to a boy is that it's hot, or the floor is crowded, or she's going to school in New York next year. No, Mother, I've done my best. I've been polite, and I've made men dance with her, but they really don't want to be bored. I've even tried to tell her about clothes and things, but she just looks strangely at me. These days, it's every girl for herself. I can't help her any more."
"Go to bed, you silly child,"
laughed Mrs. Harvey.
"Oh, well, good night then, Mother,"
said Marjorie. When she came out of the bedroom, the hall was empty. At breakfast next morning, Bernice said to Marjorie,
"I heard what you said about me to your mother last night."
Marjorie looked up, surprised, but said nothing.
"I suppose I should go home if I'm stopping you enjoying yourself. I've tried to be nice, but you haven't been nice to me, and your friends don't like me."
Bernice was almost crying. After a short silence, Marjorie said,
"When do you want to go?"
"Go?"
Bernice repeated in a shocked voice.
"Didn't you say you were going?" "Oh, you were only bluffing."
Bernice started crying loudly, while Marjorie looked bored.
If I go home early,
Cried Bernice, her face wet.
my mother will know, and she'll wonder.
I'll give you some money,
Said Marjorie coldly.
and you can spend this last week anywhere you want. There's a very nice hotel.
Bernice ran wildly out of the room and did not come to the dining room for lunch. But later that day, Marjorie found Bernice waiting for her in her bedroom.
I've decided
She said tearfully.
that maybe you're right. I'm ready to do whatever you say to make myself more interesting.
All right, then. Let's start with your eyebrows. You should brush them to make them look better. And when you go home, you must have your teeth straightened.
What else?
Said Bernice, a little shocked at her cousin's honesty.
Oh, I'm just beginning. You shouldn't stand so straight when you dance. If you're tall, that makes it harder for the man, and he's the one that matters.
Go on.
Bernice was finding all this difficult to accept.
You've got to learn to be nice to the sad birds. That's what I call them. The men who aren't good-looking or popular. They're a large part of any crowd. Every girl needs them, because if you dance with the sad birds and keep them happy, they'll want to dance with you again. Then the good-looking boys will notice and want to dance with you.
I think I begin to understand.
Said Bernice slowly.
And finally, you'll wake up one morning knowing you're attractive. And men will know it too.
Bernice stood up.
It's awfully kind of you to help me.
Marjorie did not answer at first. Then she said dreamily,
I was just wondering if we should bob your hair.
Bernice gave a scream and fell backwards onto the bed.
Oh!
The following Wednesday evening, there was a dinner dance at the golf club. At dinner, G. Reese Stoddard was sitting on Bernice's right. He was a good-looking, popular young man. But on her left, she only had Charlie Paulson, who was short and uninteresting. Remembering Marjorie's teaching, she turned to Charlie and said brightly,
Can I ask you something, Mr. Paulson? Do you think I ought to bob my hair?
Charlie smiled and said he didn't know.
I've decided
She continued.
that next week I'm going to the barber's to have my hair bobbed.
She noticed that people near her were listening, and she went bravely on.
Of course. You can all come and watch, and I'll sell you tickets.
People laughed, and G. Reese Stoddard bent towards her and whispered,
I'll take a ticket right now.
Bernice met his eyes and gave him her most beautiful smile.
What do you think about bobbed hair?
He asked her quietly.
I think it's wrong.
She said seriously.
But you've either got to make people laugh or shock them.
Marjorie had read this somewhere and made Bernice learn it.
So, I'm going to shock them.
She added. 2 hours later, Warren McIntyre was standing watching the dancers when he realized something strange was happening. All the boys, led by G. Reese Stoddard and Charlie Paulson, wanted to dance with Bernice, who had suddenly become the most popular girl in the room. During the next week, Bernice had a wonderful time. She was surrounded by young men, But it was Warren who was always the first to dance with her. Everybody thought that Marjorie didn't mind. But one day, she said coldly to her cousin,
"You can forget about Warren. He doesn't like you at all."
Bernice was surprised and felt uncomfortable. She hadn't meant to hurt Marjorie or steal Warren from her. At a party that afternoon, someone started talking again about Bernice having her hair bobbed. Suddenly, Marjorie told them all that Bernice was bluffing. People looked at Bernice, expecting her to reply, so she had to say she was ready to do it. In a few moments, the whole crowd had driven to the barber's, and Bernice found herself sitting in the barber's chair. The sharp scissors moved fast, and soon her beautiful long dark hair was lying on the ground. She saw in the mirror that all her prettiness had gone. She looked around for Warren, but he had left and was driving Marjorie home. That evening, Mr. and Mrs. Harvey were deeply shocked to see Bernice's boyishly short hair, and she decided to leave on the next train. When everyone was asleep, she wrote a letter to her aunt, which she left on her bed. She picked up something from a table and walked softly along the hall to Marjorie's room. She went to her sleeping cousin's bedside, picked up Marjorie's long braids, and cut them both off with her scissors. She returned silently to her own room for her suitcase. She left the house, feeling strangely happy, and walked towards the station. After a minute, she realized she was still holding the two braids. She laughed unexpectedly, and as she was passing Warren's house, threw the braids at the front door. She laughed again.
That'll teach her,
she said to herself, before she walked on in the moonlight.
The Cut Glass Bowl. One day, a lady called Mrs. Fairbolt went to visit her neighbor, the beautiful Mrs. Evelyn Piper.
My dear,
said Mrs. Fairbolt,
I love your house.
"I'm so pleased."
replied the beautiful Evelyn.
"You must come here more often. I'm almost always alone in the afternoon."
Mrs. Fairbolt was much too polite to say she could not possibly believe this. Everyone knew that a young man called Freddie Gedney visited Mrs. Piper 5 afternoons a week.
I love the dining room most,
she said.
All those wonderful plates and that really big cut glass bowl.
"Oh, there's a story about that bowl,"
replied Mrs. Piper sweetly.
"You remember young Carlton Canby? At one time, he was in love with me, poor boy. When I told him I was going to marry Harold, he stood up very straight and said, 'Evelyn, I'm going to give you a wedding present that's as hard as you are, and as beautiful, and as easy to see through. He frightened me a little. His eyes were so angry. Then that bowl arrived, and of course it's beautiful.
My dear, how very strange.
Mrs. Fairbolt was making notes in her head.
Hard, beautiful, and easy to see through.
She was looking forward to telling her friends. As she left the house, she said to herself, frowning,
Some friend should speak to Harold Piper. He ought to spend a little less time on business and a little more time at home.
About 2 minutes later, a good-looking young man rang the front doorbell. Mrs. Piper, looking surprised, pulled him quickly into the hall.
I had to see you.
He began wildly.
Your letter.
It's all over, Fred.
Said Evelyn.
Harold knows about us. He's hurt and angry, and he loves me. And, well, I love him too. You've got to leave, Fred. I promised him I wouldn't see you again.
Freddie was looking miserably at her for the last time, when suddenly they heard a man's footsteps outside. Quickly, Evelyn took Freddie's arm and pushed him into the dining room.
Stay there,
she whispered.
I'll make him go upstairs, and then you can go out of the front door.
But when Harold came in, he just wanted to sit in the library, reading his newspaper. Evelyn could not think what to do.
Perhaps he'll go into the dining room for a drink,
she thought with horror. Suddenly, there was a loud ringing sound from the dining room. Freddie had turned to go out of the back door, and his arm had knocked against the cut glass bowl.
What's that?
Shouted Harold.
Who's there?
She tried to stop him, but he broke away. She hurried into the dining room after him and found him holding Freddie down on the floor. Harold looked up at his wife with a face full of surprise and then pain.
You promised, Evelyn. I'll never believe you again.
She put her arms around him, but he pushed her away. She had never felt so sorry for Harold or loved him so much. For several months after this, Evelyn tried to make her husband love her again, but he only laughed angrily and refused to speak to her. So she too became silent, and a dark shadow came between them. She realized too late that she had lost his love forever. At 35, Evelyn was no longer beautiful, and she knew it. She began to look for women friends, not men. Much of her time was spent with her 2 children, especially her son, Donald, whom she loved deeply. One afternoon, she was in her bedroom when she heard a sudden scream from downstairs.
Julie!
She called, recognizing her young daughter's voice. The servant, Hilda, called up the stairs to Evelyn.
She cut herself a little, madam.
Evelyn hurried downstairs, and in a moment, Julie was in her arms.
My thumb!
Cried Julie.
Oh, it hurts! It was the ball in the dining room, madam,
Explained Hilda.
Julie was playing with it, and it cut her.
Evelyn washed the blood away and covered the thumb with a clean old handkerchief.
These servants,
She thought in disgust.
they're useless.
Luckily, it was only a small cut, and Julie seemed to be fine. When Harold came home, he told her he had invited a lot of guests to dinner that evening. One of them was Clarence Ahern. Harold's business was not doing well, and he hoped Clarence would become his new partner, just in time to save his business.
"So it's important for things to go well tonight,"
he said.
"Let's make some punch in that big cut-glass bowl."
Use the small bowl instead,
said Evelyn.
I don't want a lot of drunk men in my house.
But Harold liked a drink or two himself, and made the punch in the large bowl. That evening, Harold and his cousin Tom both got drunk on the punch. And before anyone could stop him, Tom said some unpleasant things to Clarence Ahern. Just then, Evelyn heard Hilda's voice at her elbow.
Please, madam, Julie's sick. I think it's her hand.
In a few seconds, Evelyn was upstairs at her daughter's bedside, looking in horror at Julie's red and swollen hand.
Blood poisoning,
she thought, and ran to the phone to call a doctor immediately. She could hear loud voices downstairs, and she saw her husband's brother, Milton, in the hall.
What's happened?
She called down hurriedly to him.
There's been a bit of trouble,
he replied.
Clarence got angry and Harold tried to hit him. They've all left.
But she had no time to think about her husband. When the doctor came, he said the blood poisoning was very serious. They would have to amputate Julie's swollen hand the next day. The years passed. There were lines on Evelyn's face, and she frowned most of the time. The young men she had once loved were long forgotten. Now she worried about Harold's failing business and about Julie, who was 13 and hated meeting people because they noticed her missing hand. She also worried about Donald, who had joined the army and was fighting for his country a long way from home. One evening, Hilda came to speak to her.
I'm sorry, madam. The postman brought a letter for you today, but I can't remember where I put it. A long, narrow letter it was.
Together they looked for it, but couldn't find it. Suddenly, in a moment of horror, Evelyn knew where it was. She knew it came from the War Office, and she knew there was death in it. She sent Hilda away, entered the dining room, and walked straight over to the cut glass bowl. There, inside it, was the letter. She opened the letter, her hands shaking. She read it, then dropped it on the floor. The house was suddenly very quiet. She sat down on the edge of the table and stared at the bowl. It lay there at the center of her house, never changing, never growing old, a present full of hate from a man whose face she could not remember. She realized that all her married life had been a battle between her and the bowl, a battle she could never win. It seemed to say to her,
"You know, it was I who took your son away. You know how cold I am, and how hard and how beautiful, because once you were just as cold and hard and beautiful."
The light from the cut glass seemed to fill the room. Then there came a voice from far away, like a low, clear bell.
"You see, I am fate, and stronger than your stupid plans. I am different from your little dreams, and I am the passing of time and the end of beauty. All the accidents and mistakes in your life are mine."
The deep sound stopped, and a cold wind blew in from the street. Evelyn knew what she must do.
I must be quick. I must be strong,
she thought. She put both arms round the heavy bowl and with a great effort lifted it. Out of the front door she went and on to the stone steps. There she turned to throw the bowl down, but her fingers were cold and tired and could not let go. In that second, she slipped and fell forward with a cry, her arms still around the bowl. The crash was heard at the end of the street. Upstairs, a tired man woke up and a young girl cried in her sleep. Moonlight shone on the black figure that lay still at the foot of the steps, and on the hundreds of pieces of glass, which were blue and black-edged with yellow and red-edged with black.
A short trip home. My name's Eddie Rivers, and I'd come home from college for the Christmas holidays. I was in love with Ellen Baker, a beautiful girl I'd known for years, but I wasn't hopeful. Girls of 18 always prefer older boys like Joe Jelke and Jim Cathcart. That night, Joe, Jim, Ellen, and I were all going to a dance at a hotel. We were picking Ellen up from her parents' home, but Ellen had secretly left the house by the back door. It seemed a strange thing to do, and it made Joe angry. He was crazy about Ellen. We drove on to the hotel, and there we saw Ellen getting out of a stranger's car. The driver of the car was an evil-looking, thin-faced man with an unpleasant smile.
"Eddie,"
Joe said quietly to me,
"take Ellen into the hotel, will you? I'm going to have a word with that man."
I took Ellen inside. 10 minutes later, I saw Joe and Jim come in. Joe was very white, with blood on his face.
"He hit Joe with brass knuckles,"
Jim said in a low, shocked voice.
"Joe was unconscious for a minute or so."
I found Ellen talking to some friends on the dance floor and whispered to her what had happened.
It was Joe's own fault.
She said surprisingly.
I told him not to speak to him.
This wasn't true. She had said nothing. "But, Ellen, where did you meet him?" I asked.
On the train.
She answered, adding,
Stay out of things that aren't your business, Eddie. You see what happened to Joe?
I looked at her in horror. How could she talk like that? "But that man's violent," I cried. "No girl's safe with him. He used brass knuckles on Joe." Her face seemed to harden. When she was thinking of that man, her eyes half closed, shutting out the rest of the world. She danced with other boys for the rest of the evening, and Joe just sat watching her from the edge of the room. The next day, I was passing a restaurant when I noticed some men standing outside. One of them called to me, and I turned round. There, looking at me with his evil half-smile, was a thin-faced man. His cold eyes seemed to say,
"Here I am. What are you going to do about it?"
I knew I was quicker with my hands than Joe, so I stepped forward. But suddenly, he wasn't there anymore. "Did he go inside?" I asked the other men. They looked at each other. Then one said,
"Who are you talking about?"
Angrily, I pushed past them into the restaurant and asked the waiter, "Where's the man who just walked in here?"
"Didn't see anyone come in,"
he said, shaking his head. Feeling helpless and uncomfortable, I went out. I drove straight to Ellen's home. Mrs. Baker told me Ellen was going to visit some friends, the Brokaws, in Chicago, and was leaving on the 8:30 train that night. I was pleased, because I knew Ellen would be safe there. I went home and had a long, hot bath. But all the time, I was trying to remember something. Something in my conversation with Mrs. Baker that wasn't right. Suddenly, I sat up in the bath. The Brokaws! I knew Bill Brokaw well. His family weren't in Chicago this Christmas. They were in Florida. I jumped out of the bath, threw my clothes onto my still wet body, and drove like the wind to the station. I was too late for Ellen's train, but I caught the next one some minutes later. At 8 o'clock next morning, I arrived in Chicago, jumped off my train, and luckily found her at the station office writing a lying telegram to her mother. The Brokaws are in Florida, not Chicago, I said.
It was nice of you to travel so far to tell me that.
Now you know. Why not go on by train to your school?
Please leave me alone, Eddie.
Her lovely eyes narrowed, and she gave me a cunning smile.
I'm old enough to take care of myself. I am going on to school. I've got my ticket east on the 5 o'clock train. But today, I'm going to meet a man.
I know who the man is. Again, the terrible look came back into her eyes, and she replied angrily,
Leave me alone!
I took the telegram out of her hand and wrote a new one to her mother. Then I said firmly, We'll take the 5 o'clock train east together, but you're going to spend the day with me. I can only remember parts of that day. We went shopping, and Ellen tried to escape by a back door. We drove around in a taxi, and I felt sure someone was following us. But at lunchtime, she looked me in the eye, straight and honest.
Eddie, you're my oldest friend. Please trust me. If I promise to catch that 5 o'clock train, will you leave me alone this afternoon? I want to say goodbye.
Well, I suppose if you really want to say goodbye. I looked up suddenly and saw a look of deep cunning on her face. We argued all afternoon. In the end, I got her into a taxi and we caught the 5 o'clock train. In our compartment, I took her into my arms and said, Ellen, you should trust me. Tell me all about it.
I can't,
she said, very low. You met this stranger on the train coming home from school and fell in love with him. Isn't that true? He has some kind of power over you. He's trying to get something from you. He's not in love with you.
What does that matter?
It does matter. Instead of trying to fight this thing, you're fighting me. And I love you, Ellen. Do you hear? I love you. Suddenly, I knew that he was just outside the door, in the corridor. She knew it too. The blood left her face, and her eyes half closed. I covered her with my coat, hoping she would sleep. I opened the door and went into the corridor. The man was waiting there. When he saw me, he went into the men's smoking room, and I followed him. "Are you making a trip home?" I asked. He was clearly dead. I could see that very well.
Yes.
With a terrible, soundless laugh, he said,
Get off at Fort Wayne, or I'm going to shoot you.
He showed me the shape of a gun in his pocket. I shook my head. You can't touch me. You see, I know.
You get off here, or else I'm going to kill you.
The train stopped at Fort Wayne. We sat staring at each other until the train started moving again. Then began a slow, powerful, wordless attack on me, which lasted 5 or 6 hours. A strange, sleepy feeling came over me. I stopped hating him. He was my friend and wanted to help. I should get off the train and let him get at Ellen. With a violent cry, I sat up straight. She trusts me. You can't touch her. She's safe, I said. I noticed a small, round hole above his eyebrows, and suddenly I understood. You died, or you were killed near here, and now you're losing your power. Your trip home is over. With an evil laugh, he moved towards me, and then the room was full of cold air. A door seemed to open behind him, and with a scream, he fell to the floor. His body became a shadow, and as I looked more closely, it disappeared. Some minutes later, I returned to the compartment. Ellen's lovely face was white and tired, but she lay in a deep, restful sleep. She was not in his power anymore. Next time I came home from college, I went to the restaurant where I'd seen the stranger. When I described him, one of the customers remembered him.
That's Joe Varland,
he said.
He died last year.
What did he do? Don't worry, I'm not a policeman. I just want to know, and I'll keep it to myself.
Well, he traveled on the trains a lot. He often came here with a lot of money and told us he got it from girls he met on trains. Then he got in a fight one day, and a detective shot him.
I gave the man $10 and left. I didn't tell him that part of Joe Varland had made a last trip home. It's summer now, and I see Ellen almost every day. We talk about everything except that man. Sometimes she stays silent, and I know what she's thinking about. Of course, there are lots of boys in love with her, but things don't look as impossible as they once did. She belongs to me in a way. even if I lose her.
Josephine, a woman with a past. New Haven, home of Yale College, was the city of Josephine Perry's dreams. Twice a year, the lifeblood of Chicago, where she lived, flowed into it, and twice a year it flowed back, when the young men of Yale came home for their Christmas and summer holidays. But today, seeing it for the first time, she was surprised. The boys they passed didn't look at all attractive.
I suppose I've been in love too often,
she thought. At 17, she had already broken many men's hearts. Now she had only one hope left, the possibility of finding someone she could love more than he loved her. She and her friend Adele Craw, a nice girl with heavy-looking legs, were in New Haven to buy sports clothes for their school team. They found the right shop, and Adele bought what they had come for. A man who was in the shop saw Adele and came forward to talk to her. He was tall, with clear, honest eyes and a kind smile.
Not my type,
thought Josephine.
How can he find Adele attractive?
She was introduced to the man, Dudley Knowlton. He spoke politely to her, but she could see that he was interested only in Adele.
I've got some bad news for you,
he told Adele with a smile.
You and I will have to start the dancing at the prom next week, because I'm president of the prom committee, and you know how badly I dance.
Later, Josephine asked Adele about Dudley. He was in his final year at Yale, a president of several committees, and an excellent baseball player. Adele had known him all her life, and he was taking her to the prom. They weren't engaged. They were happy to be just good friends. This was a new idea for Josephine, who believed that boys and girls should be crazy about each other, not good friends. But she found Dudley more attractive now, and hoped he would dance with her at the prom. Josephine had looked forward to the prom for months, but when she saw Dudley and Adele at the head of the dancers, she felt very disappointed. She was 10 times prettier than Adele, and she had a large crowd of young men wanting to dance with her. But here a girl was only important if the man who brought her was important. Crossly, she ordered the boys she was dancing with to dance her towards Dudley. Then she gave Dudley her most beautiful smile. He smiled back, and a minute later, he asked to dance with her.
I admire Adele so much, you know,
she said as they danced.
At school, I'm trying to be like her.
Are you?
He replied. He was a lot more good-looking than she had once thought.
I expect boys want to be like you all the time. And of course, all the girls fall in love with you.
They don't. They never have.
Oh, they do. But they're afraid of Adele.
Adele wouldn't mind. She doesn't believe in being serious about such things.
Neither do I,
agreed Josephine enthusiastically. She was wonderfully happy as she moved round the room in the arms of the president of the prom committee. But in the end, another man asked her to dance, and she had to accept. She hoped Dudley would ask her again, But by midnight, he still hadn't.
Perhaps Adele's told him about my past,
she thought. When he finally came up to her, it was to say,
Adele's got a hole in her stocking. Could she borrow a pair from you? As you're staying near here, I can drive you there.
Josephine agreed happily, and they went together to her house. He waited in the hall as she ran upstairs for the stockings.
Did you get them?
He asked as she came downstairs.
Yes. Kiss me for being so quick.
He laughed lightly and moved towards the door. She kept on smiling, but secretly she was very disappointed.
It's been wonderful meeting you,
she said as they drove back.
I've learnt a lot from you. I used to want to be exciting. Now I want to help people.
That's nice.
Back on the dance floor, she moved in a sweet dream. Then a new man arrived, a tall Southerner, who told her she was the most beautiful girl in the room. After their second dance, he invited her to a friend's flat. It was in the same building, down a corridor and through a door. Inside the flat, he took her gently in his arms and kissed her, long and slow. Suddenly, they heard a key turn in the lock, a laugh or two, and then the sound of footsteps running away.
Who was that?
Asked Josephine. She noticed they were in a bedroom, not a sitting room.
Some boy's just playing stupid games. Wait until I get my hands on him. It won't look good if someone on the committee finds us here, will it?
We must get out,
Josephine said firmly. She saw a window high up in the wall and told the man to throw all the blankets from the bed onto the ground outside. He jumped out first, then she followed. She said a quick goodbye to him and returned to the dance floor. The first person she met was Dudley.
Sorry, I can't stop,
he said.
There's a man and a girl in a bedroom, and I have to,
Could I write to you when I'm back at school?
She broke in.
I really need a friend I can be serious with.
Of course.
He smiled as he hurried away. As fate had it, she saw him again later. He was helping Adele on with her coat and explaining.
The door was locked, and the window open?
Josephine turned away, sure that he and Adele knew she was the girl in the flat. But Adele saw her and called to her.
You were so sweet about the stockings.
She gave Josephine a kiss and said to Dudley,
Here's a girl you won't find doing bad things. You'll see I'm right. Next year, she'll be the most respected girl in school.
That spring, Josephine found her ideas were changing. A year ago, she wanted fun and dancing and 20 boys in love with her. Now she was beginning to think life was more serious than that. She had read in a book somewhere,
He is the kind of man who could be the father of my children.
That was surely more important than stolen kisses behind a half-closed door. Dudley had sent her 2 letters, which were answers to hers, and she kept them next to her heart. The writer said his baseball team was visiting the town of Hot Springs at Easter and looked forward to seeing her soon. It was hard to read any feeling into these letters, but Josephine knew every word by heart. At school, fate was working against her. Some of her friends were caught by a teacher while they were having secret nighttime conversations through their bedroom windows with boys. Josephine was accused of the crime, along with her friends. And although she explained that she had nothing to do with it, the teachers didn't believe her. She became wildly angry and forgot to be polite and respectful. So she was sent home from school. Her parents took her to Hot Springs for Easter, and at a dance in the hotel, she realized the Yale baseball team was there. Suddenly, Dudley was at her side, asking her to dance. He seemed really pleased to see her. She was surprised and so happy.
Did you hear about what happened at my school?
I did, but everybody knows you did nothing wrong.
I hoped I'd meet you here. You see, when I really like a boy, I want to be with him all day and all evening. Don't you?
Dudley was silent for a moment.
Well, I'm going to be busy. I mean, Adele's getting here tomorrow.
Josephine felt suddenly frightened.
You'll be with Adele. You are just sorry for me. You like her much better. I'm not your kind of girl, am I?
It isn't that,
he said helplessly.
Yes, it is.
She replied with feeling, crying miserably.
I'm just paying for my past.
He left her, and when she looked round for him, he had gone.
He doesn't love me, so I can forget him,
she thought.
But I'll never forget what I've learned from him. There are two kinds of men. The ones you play with, and the ones you marry.
Her eyes searched the dance floor. She noticed the nice boy who had asked for the first dance that evening. She knew without thinking which kind of man he was. So when he asked her to walk into the moonlight, she took his arm, and they went out together.
The Wedding Party. A little note was waiting for him at the hotel where he was staying. It contained the usual polite lie,
I wanted you to be the first to know.
Michael Curley was badly shocked. Caroline was engaged and was going to be married in 2 weeks' time. The worst of it was that she wasn't going to get married far away in New York, but right here in Paris, where he lived. He had met Caroline Dandy in New York when she was 17, and they had fallen in love. Then he had lost her, slowly, sadly, uselessly, because he had no money and could make no money. He had no idea what to work at, and although Caroline still loved him, she no longer believed in him. Broken-hearted, Michael moved to France, but he could not stop thinking of Caroline. Now her note informed him that he had lost her forever. As he walked in the sunshine down the Rue de Castiglione, he suddenly heard a voice he recognized, and his stomach went cold. Turning quickly, he was face to face with Caroline and her fiancé.
Michael, I've been looking for you all over Paris.
Why don't they just go away?
Michael thought.
This is Hamilton Rutherford, my fiancé.
It was all very painful. Michael had heard about Hamilton Rutherford. He had bought a business for $125,000 of borrowed money and sold it at just the right time for more than $500,000. He was not good-looking like Michael, but attractive, confident, and taller than Caroline. Michael had always been too short for her when they danced together. Rutherford was saying,
"Can you come to my bachelor dinner? I'd like that very much."
And Michael,
added Caroline.
please come to George Packman's party the day after tomorrow. All my family are here for the wedding.
All her family. They had always hated him. He felt very small in this game of families and money. Quickly, he began to say something about going away. Then it happened. Caroline saw deep into him, and Michael knew that she saw. All the unforgettable power of first love flowed through both of them again. She took her fiancé's arm suddenly and said goodbye to Michael. He walked fast for a minute, then turned to look back at them.
She'll never be happy, married to him, and I'll never be happy at all anymore,
he said to himself. At his hotel, the concierge gave him a telegram, which Michael read. The news was that his grandfather had died, leaving Michael $250,000. At first, Michael was excited, but soon he became miserable again.
Too late by a single month,
he thought. As he lay awake that night, he could still see the look in Caroline's eyes that morning, a look that seemed to say,
Oh, why weren't you stronger? Why didn't you make me marry you?
He sat up in bed.
I won't give up,
he whispered.
Even if I can't have her, I can make sure she keeps some of me in her heart.
So he went to George Packman's party 2 days later and met Hamilton's friends, who were all rich, well-dressed, and confident. He thought Caroline looked white and tired. One of the guests told him about a surprise some of them were planning for Hamilton's bachelor dinner. They were going to pay a pretty French girl to arrive with a baby in her arms. The girl was going to cry, "Hamilton, you can't leave me now." Michael didn't find this at all amusing. Another guest told him that Hamilton was losing money on the stock market. Michael asked Caroline to dance.
I'm so pleased you came.
She said,
Now we can be just good friends. I want you and Hamilton to like each other.
I've never heard her say stupid things like that before,
thought Michael. Aloud, he said pleasantly,
I could kill him without a moment's worry, but he seems a good man. What I want to know is, what happens to people like me who can't forget?
She was silent. Then, with a lovely smile, she said,
I told Hamilton that I loved you, but it didn't worry him, because I don't love you anymore, and you'll wake up one sunny morning and find you don't love me anymore. Just like that.
Michael shook his head.
Oh, yes, you will. We weren't right for each other. I need someone like Hamilton to decide things for me. It was that, more than the question of
money?
He said.
Then what about the other day, when we were one person again, with the same heart and blood?
Oh, don't.
She cried.
You mustn't talk like that. I love Hamilton with all my heart.
Michael left the party soon afterwards. He saw her several times in the next week, but she was always with her fiancé. Michael decided to speak to Hamilton alone, and they agreed to meet in a bar in 2 days' time. The wedding was now only 6 days away. Michael planned what he was going to say.
See here, Rutherford. Do you realize what you're doing? Caroline loves me. And now that I have enough money to marry her, we must let her choose between us.
He was fighting for his life. But when they met, it wasn't a successful conversation. Michael could not persuade Hamilton to let Caroline go. The bachelor dinner took place 2 days later. Michael put on an expensive new suit and was surprised to find what a difference it made. He felt much more confident. Hamilton's friends were ready to bring in the girl with the baby, when another girl arrived unexpectedly to see Hamilton and make trouble for him. Michael went to warn Hamilton, and then, feeling almost hopeful, took a taxi to Caroline's hotel.
My place is beside her now,
he thought.
I must be with her when her world comes crashing down around her.
Caroline came down from her room to meet him in the hall.
Tell me about your plans, Michael,
she said politely.
My plans? The only real plan I ever had was to love you. And now, when I think of all the years ahead without you, without any hope, I don't want to live, Caroline, darling.
She was crying softly.
Poor Michael.
Her hand reached out and touched his chest.
Why, you've got a new suit,
she said, suddenly smiling.
Have you inherited some money?
Yes, $250,000.
I'm so happy for you, Michael.
Well, it's come just too late to make a difference.
Hamilton came into the hotel looking tired. He kissed Caroline and said hello to Michael.
There was a girl at the dinner trying to blackmail me,
he told Caroline.
The police are taking care of it now.
He opened 2 telegrams which Caroline had handed to him.
Ah, this will interest you,
he said to Michael.
I've lost every cent I had on the stock market, and I hear you've inherited a nice lot of money. Well, that's the way it goes.
He turned to Caroline.
You understand what I'm saying, darling? I have nothing left.
2 pairs of eyes watched Caroline for a few moments. Suddenly she stood up and threw herself into Hamilton's arms.
Oh, darling,
she cried.
I like it better. Honestly, I do.
All right, baby,
said Rutherford.
Now you get some sleep. I promise to go back to the party for an hour.
I'll go with you,
said Michael. At the wedding, Michael, white and shaky after a sleepless night, stood at the back of the church. It seemed to go on for a long time, and then Rutherford and Caroline were walking past him as husband and wife. The guests all moved on to an expensive hotel, and Michael was surprised to discover that even the drinks in the bar were paid for by Hamilton.
Can you believe it?
George Packman said to him.
This party will cost Hamilton $5,000, but he refused to do it more cheaply. I hear he was offered a job at $50,000 a year, 10 minutes before the wedding. He'll be rich again in a few months.
There was a long, beautifully cooked meal, and there was dancing. Suddenly, Michael realized with a shock that he hadn't really thought of Caroline for hours. He saw her across the room, very bright and young and happy. And he saw Rutherford near her, looking lovingly at her. And as he watched them, they seemed to disappear into a world of their own. Michael was cured. All his bitterness left him. He was trying to remember which of the bridesmaids he had asked to dinner that night, as he stepped forward to say goodbye to Hamilton and Caroline Rutherford.
The Lees of Happiness by F. Scott Fitzgerald. If you should look through the files of old magazines for the first years of the present century, you would find, sandwiched in between the stories of Richard Harding Davis and Frank Norris and others long since dead, the work of one Geoffrey Curtin, a novel or two, and perhaps 3 or 4 dozen short stories. You could, if you were interested, follow them along until, say, 1908, when they suddenly disappeared. When you had read them all, you would have been quite sure that here were no masterpieces. Here were passably amusing stories, a bit out of date now, but doubtless the sort that would then have whiled away a dreary half-hour in a dental office. The man who did them was of good intelligence, talented, glib, probably young. In the samples of his work, you found there would have been nothing to stir you to more than a faint interest in the whims of life, no deep interior laughs, no sense of futility, or hint of tragedy. After reading them, you would yawn and put the number back in the files, and perhaps, if you were in some library reading room, you would decide that by way of variety, you would look at a newspaper of the period and see whether the Japs had taken Port Arthur. But if by any chance the newspaper you had chosen was the right one and had cracked open at the theatrical page, your eyes would have been arrested and held. For at least a minute you would have forgotten Port Arthur as quickly as you forgot Chateau Thierry. For you would, by this fortunate chance, be looking at the portrait of an exquisite woman. Those were the days of Florodora and of sextets, of pinched-in waists and blown-out sleeves, of almost bustles and absolute ballet skirts. But here, without doubt, disguised as she might be by the unaccustomed stiffness and old fashion of her costume, was a butterfly of butterflies. Here was the gaiety of the period, the soft wine of eyes, the songs that flurried hearts, the toasts and the bouquets, the dances and the dinners. Here was a Venus of the hansom cab, the Gibson girl, in her glorious prime. Here was, you find by looking at the name beneath, one Roxanne Milbank, who had been chorus girl and understudy in the Daisy Chain, but who, by reason of an excellent performance when the star was indisposed, had gained a leading part. You would look again and wonder why you'd never heard of her. Why did her name not linger in popular songs and vaudeville jokes and cigar bands, and the memory of that gay old uncle of yours, along with Lillian Runsell and Stella Mayhew and Anna Held? Roxanne Milbank. Whither had she gone? What dark trapdoor had opened suddenly and swallowed her up? Her name was certainly not in last Sunday's supplement on that list of actresses married to English noblemen. No doubt she was dead, poor beautiful young lady, and quite forgotten. I am hoping too much. I am having you stumble on Geoffrey Curtin's stories and Roxanne Milbank's picture It would be incredible that you should find a newspaper item 6 months later. A single item, 2 inches by 4, which informed the public of the marriage, very quietly, of Miss Roxanne Milbank, who had been on tour with the Daisy Chain, to Mr. Geoffrey Curtin, the popular author. Mrs. Curtin, it added dispassionately, will retire from the stage. It was a marriage of love. He was sufficiently spoiled to be charming. She was ingenuous enough to be irresistible. Like 2 floating logs, they met in a head-on rush, caught and sped along together. Yet had Geoffrey Curtin kept at scrivening for 20 years, he could not have put a quirk into one of his stories weirder than the quirk that came into his own life. Had Roxanne Milbank played 36 parts and filled 5,000 houses, she could never have had a role with more happiness and more despair than were in the fate prepared for Roxanne Curtin. For a year, they lived in hotels, travelled to California, to Alaska, to Florida, to Mexico, loved and quarrelled gently, and gloried in the golden triflings of his wit with her beauty. They were young and gravely passionate. They demanded everything, and then yielded everything again, in ecstasies of unselfishness and pride. She loved the swift tones of his voice and his frantic, unfounded jealousy. He loved her dark radiance, the white irises of her eyes, the warm, lustrous enthusiasm of her smile. "Don't you like her?" he would demand rather excitedly and shyly. "Isn't she wonderful? Did you ever see?" "Yes," they would answer, grinning. "She's a wonder. You're lucky." The year passed. They tired of hotels. They bought an old house and 20 acres near the town of Marlow, half an hour from Chicago. Bought a little car and moved out riotously with a pioneering hallucination that would have confounded Balboa. "Your room will be here," they cried in turn, and then, "and my room here, and the nursery here when we have children, and we'll build a sleeping porch, next year." They moved out in April. In July, Geoffrey's closest friend, Harry Cromwell, came to spend a week. They met him at the end of the long lawn and hurried him proudly to the house. Harry was married also. His wife had had a baby some 6 months before and was still recuperating at her mother's in New York. Roxanne had gathered from Geoffrey that Harry's wife was not as attractive as Harry. Geoffrey had met her once and considered her shallow. But Harry had been married nearly 2 years and was apparently happy, so Geoffrey guessed that she was probably all right. "I'm making biscuits," chattered Roxanne gravely. "Can your wife make biscuits? The cook is showing me how. I think every woman should know how to make biscuits. It sounds so utterly disarming. A woman who can make biscuits can surely do no—" "You'll have to come out here and live," said Geoffrey. "Get a place out in the country like us, for you and Kitty." "You don't know Kitty. She hates the country. She's got to have her theatres and vaudevilles." "Bring her out," repeated Geoffrey. "We'll have a colony. There's an awfully nice crowd here already. Bring her out." They were at the porch steps now, and Roxanne made a brisk gesture toward a dilapidated structure on the right. "The garage," she announced. "It will also be Geoffrey's writing room within the month. Meanwhile, dinner is at 7. Meanwhile to that, I will mix a cocktail." The 2 men ascended to the 2nd floor. That is, they ascended halfway, for at the first landing, Geoffrey dropped his guest's suitcase, and in a cross between a query and a cry exclaimed, "For God's sake, Harry, how do you like her?" "We'll go upstairs," answered his guest, "and we will shut the door." Half an hour later, as they were sitting together in the library, Roxanne reissued from the kitchen, bearing before her a pan of biscuits. Geoffrey and Harry rose. "They're beautiful, dear," said his husband intensely. "Exquisite," murmured Harry. Roxanne beamed. Taste one. I couldn't bear to touch them before you'd seen them all, and I can't bear to take them back until I found out what they taste like. Like manna, darling. Simultaneously, the two men raised the biscuits to their lips, nibbled tentatively. Simultaneously, they tried to change the subject. But Roxane, undeceived, set down the pan and seized a biscuit. After a second, her comment rang out with lugubrious finality. Absolutely bum! Really? Why, I didn't notice. Roxane roared. Oh, I'm useless, she cried, laughing. Turn me out, Geoffrey. I'm a parasite. I'm no good. Geoffrey put his arm around her. Darling, I'll eat your biscuits. They're beautiful anyway, insisted Roxane. They're decorative, suggested Harry. Geoffrey took him up wildly. That's the word. They're decorative. They're masterpieces. We'll use them. He rushed to the kitchen and returned with a hammer and a handful of nails. We'll use them, by golly, Roxane. We'll make a frieze out of them. Don't, wailed Roxane. Our beautiful house. Never mind. We're going to have the library repapered in October. Don't you remember? Well... Bang! The first biscuit was impaled to the wall, where it quivered for a moment like a live thing. Bang! When Roxane returned with the second round of cocktails, the biscuits were in a perpendicular row, 12 of them, like a collection of primitive spearheads. Roxane, exclaimed Geoffrey, you're an artist! Cook? Nonsense! You shall illustrate my books. During dinner, the twilight faltered into dusk, and later it was a starry dark outside, filled and permeated with the frail gorgeousness of Roxane's white dress and her tremulous low laugh. Such a little girl she is, thought Harry, not as old as Kitty. He compared the two. Kitty, nervous without being sensitive, temperamental without temperament. A woman who seemed to flit and never light. And Roxane, who was as young as a spring night and summed up in her own adolescent laughter. A good match for Geoffrey, he thought again. Two very young people, the sort who'll stay very young until they suddenly find themselves old. Harry thought these things between his constant thoughts about Kitty. He was depressed about Kitty. It seemed to him that she was well enough to come back to Chicago and bring his little son. He was thinking vaguely of Kitty when he said good night to his friend's wife and his friend at the foot of the stairs. You're our first real house guest, called Roxane after him. Aren't you thrilled and proud? When he was out of sight around the stair corner, she turned to Geoffrey, who was standing beside her, resting his hand on the end of the banister. Are you tired, my dearest? Geoffrey rubbed the centre of his forehead with his fingers. A little. How did you know? Oh, how could I help knowing about you? It's a headache, he said moodily. Splitting. I'll take some aspirin. She reached over and snapped out the light, and with his arm tight around her waist, they walked up the stairs together. Harry's week passed. They drove about the dreaming lanes or idled in cheerful inanity upon lake or lawn. In the evening, Roxane, sitting inside, played to them while the ashes whitened on the glowing ends of their cigars. Then came a telegram from Kitty, saying that she wanted Harry to come east and get her. So Roxane and Geoffrey were left alone in that privacy of which they never seemed to tire. Alone thrilled them again. They wandered about the house, each feeling intimately the presence of the other. They sat on the same side of the table like honeymooners. They were intensely absorbed, intensely happy. The town of Marlow, though a comparatively old settlement, had only recently acquired a society. 5 or 6 years before, alarmed at the smoky swelling of Chicago, 2 or 3 young married couples, bungalow people, had moved out. Their friends had followed. The Geoffrey curtains found an already formed set, prepared to welcome them. A country club, ballroom, and golf links yawned for them. And there were bridge parties and poker parties and parties where they drank beer and parties where they drank nothing at all. It was at a poker party that they found themselves a week after Harry's departure. There were 2 tables, and a good proportion of the young wives were smoking and shouting their bets and being very daringly mannish for those days. Roxanne had left the game early and taken to perambulation. She wandered into the pantry and found herself some grape juice. Beer gave her a headache. And then passed from table to table, looking over shoulders at the hands, keeping an eye on Geoffrey and being pleasantly unexcited and content. Geoffrey, with intense concentration, was raising a pile of chips of all colours, and Roxanne knew by the deepened wrinkle between his eyes that he was interested. She liked to see him interested in small things. She crossed over quietly and sat down on the arm of his chair. She sat there 5 minutes, listening to the sharp, intermittent comments of the men and the chattering of the women, which rose from the table like soft smoke, and yet scarcely hearing either. Then quite innocently, she reached out her hand, intending to place it on Geoffrey's shoulder. As it touched him, he started of a sudden, gave a short grunt, and sweeping back his arm furiously, caught her a glancing blow on her elbow. There was a general gasp. Roxanne regained her balance, gave a little cry, and rose quickly to her feet. It had been the greatest shock of her life. This, from Geoffrey, the heart of kindness, of consideration, this instinctively brutal gesture. The gasp became a silence. A dozen eyes were turned on Geoffrey, who looked up as though seeing Roxanne for the first time. An expression of bewilderment settled on his face. "Why, Roxanne," he said haltingly. Into a dozen minds entered a quick suspicion, a rumour of scandal. Could it be that behind the scenes with this couple, apparently so in love, lurked some curious antipathy? Why else this streak of fire across such a cloudless heaven? "Geoffrey," Roxanne's voice was pleading, startled and horrified. She yet knew that it was a mistake. Not once did it occur to her to blame him or to resent it. Her word was a trembling supplication. "Tell me, Geoffrey," it said. "Tell Roxanne, your own Roxanne." "Why, Roxanne," began Geoffrey again. The bewildered look changed to pain. He was clearly as startled as she. "I didn't intend that," he went on. "You startled me. I felt as if someone were attacking me. How idiotic." "Geoffrey," again the word was a prayer, incense offered up to a high God through this new and unfathomable darkness. They were both on their feet. They were saying goodbye, faltering, apologizing, explaining. There was no attempt to pass it off easily. That way lay sacrilege. Geoffrey had not been feeling well, they said. He had become nervous. Back of both their minds was the unexplained horror of that blow. The marvel that there had been an instant something between them, his anger and her fear. And now to both a sorrow, momentary no doubt, but to be bridged at once while there was yet time. Was that swift water lashing under their feet, the fierce glint of some uncharted chasm? Out in their car, under the harvest moon, he talked brokenly. It was just incomprehensible to him, he said. He had been thinking of the poker game, absorbed, and the touch on his shoulder had seemed like an attack. An attack! He clung to that word, flung it up as a shield. He had hated what had touched him. With the impact of his hand it had gone, that nervousness, That was all he knew. Both their eyes filled with tears, and they whispered love there under the broad night as the serene streets of Marlow sped by. Later, when they went to bed, they were quite calm. Geoffrey was to take a week off all work, was simply to loll and sleep and go on long walks until this nervousness left him. When they had decided this, safety settled down upon Roxane. The pillows underhead became soft and friendly. The bed on which they lay seemed wide and white and sturdy beneath the radiance that streamed in at the window. 5 days later, in the first cool of late afternoon, Geoffrey picked up an oat chair and sent it crashing through his own front window. Then he lay down on the couch like a child, weeping piteously and begging to die. A blood clot, the size of a marble, had broken in his brain. There is a sort of waking nightmare that sets in sometimes when one has missed a sleep or two, a feeling that comes with extreme fatigue and a new sun, that the quality of the life around has changed. It's a fully articulate conviction that somehow the existence one is then leading is a branch shoot of life, and is related to life only as a moving picture or a mirror, that the people and streets and houses are only projections from a very dim and chaotic past. It was in such a state that Roxane found herself during the first months of Geoffrey's illness. She slept only when she was utterly exhausted. She awoke under a cloud. The long, sober-voiced consultations, the faint aura of medicine in the halls, the sudden tiptoeing in a house that had echoed to many cheerful footsteps, and most of all, Geoffrey's white face amid the pillows of the bed they had shared. These things subdued her and made her indelibly older. The doctors held out hope, but that was all. A long rest, they said, and quiet. So responsibility came to Roxane. It was she who paid the bills, pored over his bank book, corresponded with his publishers. She was in the kitchen constantly. She learned from the nurse how to prepare his meals, and after the first month took complete charge of the sick room. She had had to let the nurse go for reasons of economy. One of the 2 coloured girls left at the same time. Roxane was realizing that they had been living from short story to short story. The most frequent visitor was Harry Cromwell. He had been shocked and depressed by the news, and though his wife was now living with him in Chicago, he found time to come out several times a month. Roxane found his sympathy welcome. There was some quality of suffering in the man, some inherent pitifulness that made her comfortable when he was near. Roxane's nature had suddenly deepened. She felt sometimes that with Geoffrey she was losing her children also, those children that now, most of all, she needed and should have had. It was 6 months after Geoffrey's collapse, and when the nightmare had faded, leaving not the old world but a new one, greyer and colder, that she went to see Harry's wife. Finding herself in Chicago with an extra hour before train time, she decided out of courtesy to call. As she stepped inside the door, she had an immediate impression that the apartment was very like some place she had seen before, and almost instantly she remembered a round-the-corner bakery of her childhood, a bakery full of rows and rows of pink frosted cakes, a stuffy pink, pink as a food, pink triumphant, vulgar and odious. And this apartment was like that. It was pink. It smelled pink. Mrs. Cromwell, attired in a wrapper of pink and black, opened the door. Her hair was yellow, heightened, Roxane imagined, by a dash of peroxide in the rinsing water every week. Her eyes were a thin waxen blue. She was pretty and too consciously graceful. Her cordiality was strident and intimate. Hostility melted so quickly to hospitality that it seemed they were both merely in the face and voice, never touching nor touched by the deep core of egotism beneath. But to Roxanne, these things were secondary. Her eyes were caught and held in uncanny fascination by the wrapper. It was vilely unclean. From its lowest hem up 4 inches, it was sheerly dirty with the blue dust of the floor. For the next 3 inches it was grey. Then it shaded off into its natural colour, which was pink. It was dirty at the sleeves, too, and at the collar. And when the woman turned to lead the way into the parlour, Roxanne was sure that her neck was dirty. A one-sided rattle of conversation began. Mrs. Cromwell became explicit about her likes and dislikes, her head, her stomach, her teeth, her apartment, avoiding with a sort of insolent meticulousness any inclusion of Roxanne with life, as if presuming that Roxanne, having been dealt a blow, wished life to be carefully skirted. Roxanne smiled. That kimono, that neck. After 5 minutes, a little boy toddled into the parlour. A dirty little boy clad in dirty pink rompers. His face was smudgy. Roxanne wanted to take him into her lap and wipe his nose. Other parts in the vicinity of his head needed attention. His tiny shoes were kicked out at the toes. Unspeakable. "What a darling little boy!" exclaimed Roxanne, smiling radiantly. "Come here to me." Mrs. Cromwell looked coldly at her son. "He will get dirty. Look at that face." She held her head on one side and regarded him critically. "Isn't he a darling?" repeated Roxanne. "Look at his rompers," frowned Mrs. Cromwell. "He needs a change, don't you, George?" George stared at her curiously. To his mind the word rompers connotated a garment extraneously smeared, as this one. "I tried to make him look respectable this morning," complained Mrs. Cromwell, as one whose patience had been sorely tried. "And I found he didn't have any more rompers. So rather than have him go around without any, I put him back in those. And his face. How many pairs has he?" Roxanne's voice was pleasantly curious. "How many feather fans have you?" she might have asked. "Oh," Mrs. Cromwell considered, wrinkling her pretty brow. "5, I think. Plenty, I know." "You can get them for 50 cents a pair." Mrs. Cromwell's eyes showed surprise and the faintest superiority. The price of rompers? "Can you really? I had no idea. He ought to have plenty, but I haven't had a minute all week to send the laundry out." Then, dismissing the subject as irrelevant, "I must show you some things." They rose, and Roxanne followed her past an open bathroom door, whose garment-littered floor showed indeed that the laundry hadn't been sent out for some time, into another room that was, so to speak, the quintessence of pinkness. This was Mrs. Cromwell's room. Here the hostess opened a closet door and displayed before Roxanne's eyes an amazing collection of lingerie. There were dozens of filmy marvels of lace and silk, all clean, unruffled, seemingly not yet touched. On hangers beside them were 3 new evening dresses. "I have some beautiful things," said Mrs. Cromwell, "but not much of a chance to wear them. Harry doesn't care about going out." Spite crept into her voice. "He's perfectly content to let me play nursemaid and housekeeper all day and loving wife in the evening." Roxanne smiled again. "You've got some beautiful clothes here." "Yes, I have. Let me show you. Beautiful, repeated Roxanne, interrupting. But I'll have to run if I'm going to catch my train. She felt that her hands were trembling. She wanted to put them on this woman and shake her. Shake her. She wanted her locked up somewhere and set to scrubbing floors. Beautiful, she repeated, but I just came in for a moment. Well, I'm sorry Harry isn't here. They moved toward the door. And oh, said Roxanne with an effort, yet her voice was still gentle and her lips were smiling. I think it's Argyle's where you can get those rompers. Goodbye. It was not until she'd reached the station and bought her ticket to Marlow that Roxanne realized it was the first 5 minutes in 6 months that her mind had been off Geoffrey. A week later, Harry appeared at Marlow, arriving unexpectedly at 5 o'clock, and coming up the walk, sank into a porch chair in a state of exhaustion. Roxanne herself had had a busy day and was worn out. The doctors were coming at 5:30, bringing a celebrated nerve specialist from New York. She was excited and thoroughly depressed. But Harry's eyes made her sit down beside him. What's the matter? Nothing, Roxanne, he denied. I came to see how Jeff was doing. Don't you bother about me. Harry, insisted Roxanne. There's something the matter. Nothing, he repeated. How's Jeff? Anxiety darkened her face. He's a little worse, Harry. Dr. Jewett has come on from New York. They thought he could tell me something definite. He's going to try and find whether this paralysis has anything to do with the original blood clot. Harry rose. Oh, I'm sorry, he said jerkily. I didn't know you expected a consultation. I wouldn't have come. I thought I'd just rock on your porch for an hour. Sit down, she commanded. Harry hesitated. Sit down, Harry, dear boy. Her kindness flooded out now, enveloped him. I know there's something the matter. You're white as a sheet. I'm going to get you a cool bottle of beer. All at once, he collapsed into his chair and covered his face with his hands. I can't make her happy, he said slowly. I've tried and I've tried. This morning we had some words about breakfast. I'd been getting my breakfast downtown, and, well, just after I went to the office, she left the house, went east to her mother's, with George, and a suitcase full of lace underwear. Harry. And I don't know. There was a crunch on the gravel, a car turning into the drive. Roxanne uttered a little cry. It's Dr. Jewett. Oh, You'll wait, won't you? She interrupted abstractedly. He saw that his problem had already died on the troubled surface of her mind. There was an embarrassing minute of vague, elided introductions, and then Harry followed the party inside and watched them disappear up the stairs. He went into the library and sat down on the big sofa. For an hour he watched the sun creep up the patterned folds of the chintz curtains. In the deep quiet, a trapped wasp, buzzing on the inside of the window pane, assumed the proportions of a clamour. From time to time another buzzing drifted down from upstairs, resembling several more larger wasps caught on larger window panes. He heard low footfalls, the clink of bottles, the clamour of pouring water. What had he and Roxanne done that life should deal these crushing blows to them? Upstairs, there was taking place a living inquest on the soul of his friend. He was sitting here in a quiet room listening to the plaint of a wasp, just as when he was a boy he'd been compelled by a strict aunt to sit hour-long on a chair and atone for some misbehaviour. But who had put him here? What ferocious aunt had leaned out of the sky to make him atone for what? About Kitty he felt a great hopelessness. She was too expensive. That was the irremediable difficulty. Suddenly he hated her. He wanted to throw her down and kick at her, to tell her she was a cheat and a leech, that she was dirty. Moreover, she must give him his boy. He rose and began pacing up and down the room. Simultaneously, he heard someone begin walking along the hallway upstairs in exact time with him. He found himself wondering if they would walk in time until the person reached the end of the hall. Kitty had gone to her mother. God help her, what a mother to go to. He tried to imagine the meeting, the abused wife collapsing upon the mother's breast. He could not. That Kitty was capable of any deep grief was unbelievable. He had gradually grown to think of her as something unapproachable and callous. She would get a divorce, of course, and eventually she would marry again. He began to consider this. Whom would she marry? He laughed bitterly, stopped. A picture flashed before him of Kitty's arms around some man whose face he could not see, of Kitty's lips pressed close to other lips in what was surely passion. God! He cried aloud. God! 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 Then the pictures came thick and fast. The Kitty of this morning faded. The soiled kimono rolled up and disappeared. The pouts and rages and tears all were washed away. Again she was Kitty Carr. Kitty Carr with yellow hair and great baby eyes. Ah, she had loved him. She had loved him. After a while, he perceived that something was amiss with him. Something that had nothing to do with Kitty or Jeff. Something of a different genre. Amazingly, it burst on him at last. He was hungry. Simple enough. He would go into the kitchen in a moment and ask the coloured cook for a sandwich. After that, he must go back to the city. He paused at the wall, jerked at something round and, fingering it absently, put it to his mouth and tasted it as a baby tastes a bright toy. His teeth closed on it. Ah! She'd left that damn kimono, that dirty pink kimono. She might have had the decency to take it with her, he thought. It would hang in the house like a corpse of their sick alliance. He would try to throw it away, but he would never be able to bring himself to move it. It would be like Kitty, soft and pliable, withal impervious. You couldn't move Kitty. You couldn't reach Kitty. There was nothing there to reach. He understood that perfectly. He had understood it all along. He reached to the wall for another biscuit, and with an effort pulled it out, nail and all. He carefully removed the nail from the centre, wondering idly if he had eaten the nail with the first biscuit. Preposterous! He would have remembered. It was a huge nail. He felt his stomach. He must be very hungry. He considered, remembered. Yesterday he'd had no dinner. It was the girls' day out, and Kitty had lain in her room eating chocolate drops. She had said she felt smothery and couldn't bear having him near her. He had given George a bath and put him to bed, and then laid down on the couch, intending to rest a minute before getting his own dinner. There he'd fallen asleep and awakened about 11, to find that there was nothing in the icebox except a spoonful of potato salad. This he had eaten, together with some chocolate drops that he found on Kitty's bureau. This morning he had breakfast hurriedly downtown before going to the office. But at noon, beginning to worry about Kitty, he had decided to go home and take her out to lunch. After that, there had been the note on his pillow. The pile of lingerie in the closet was gone, and she had left instructions for sending her trunk. He had never been so hungry, he thought. At 5 o'clock, when the visiting nurse tiptoed downstairs, he was sitting on the sofa staring at the carpet. "Mr. Cromwell?" "Yes?" "Oh, Mrs. Curtin won't be able to see you at dinner. She's not well. She told me to tell you that the cook will fix you something and that there's a spare bedroom." "She's sick, you say?" "She's lying down in her room. The consultation is just over." Did they decide anything?" "Yes," said the nurse softly. "Dr. Jewett says there's no hope. Mr. Curtin may live indefinitely, but he'll never see again, or move again, or think. He'll just breathe." "Just breathe?" "Yes." For the first time, the nurse noted that beside the writing desk, where she remembered that she had seen a line of a dozen curious round objects she had vaguely imagined to be some exotic form of decoration, there was now only one. Where the others had been, there was now a series of little nail holes. Harry followed her glance dazedly and then rose to his feet. "I don't believe I'll stay. I believe there's a train." She nodded. Harry picked up his hat. "Goodbye," she said pleasantly. "Goodbye," he answered, as though talking to himself. And, evidently moved by some involuntary necessity, he paused on his way to the door, and she saw him pluck the last object from the wall and drop it into his pocket. Then he opened the screen door, and descending the porch steps, passed out of her sight. After a while, the coat of clean white paint on the Geoffrey Curtin house made a definite compromise with the suns of many Julys and showed its good faith by turning grey. Its scaled, huge peelings of very brittle old paint leaned over backward like aged men practicing grotesque gymnastics and finally dropped to a mouldy death in the overgrown grass beneath. The paint on the front pillars became streaky. The white ball was knocked off the left-hand doorpost. The green blinds darkened, then lost all pretence of colour. It began to be a house that was avoided by the tender-minded. Some church bought a lot diagonally opposite for a graveyard, and this combined with the place where Mrs. Curtin stays with that living corpse was enough to throw a ghostly aura over that quarter of the road. Not that she was left alone. Men and women came to see her, met her downtown where she went to do her marketing, brought her home in their cars, and came in for a moment to talk and to rest in the glamour that still played in her smile. But men who did not know her no longer followed her with admiring glances in the street. A diaphanous veil had come down over her beauty, destroying its vividness, yet bringing neither wrinkles nor fat. She acquired a character in the village. A group of little stories were told of her. How, when the country was frozen over one winter so that no wagons or automobiles could travel, she taught herself to skate, so that she could make quick time to the grocer and druggist and not leave Geoffrey alone for long. It was said that every night since his paralysis she slept in a small bed beside his bed, holding his hand. Geoffrey Curtin was spoken of as though he were already dead. As the years dropped by, those who had known him died or moved away. There were but half a dozen of the old crowd who had drunk cocktails together, called each other's wives by their first names, and thought that Jeff was about the wittiest and most talented fellow that Marlowe had ever known. Now, to the casual visitor, he was merely the reason that Mrs. Curtin excused herself sometimes and hurried upstairs. He was a groan or a sharp cry borne to the silent parlour on the heavy air of a Sunday afternoon. He could not move. He was stone blind, dumb, and totally unconscious. All day he lay in his bed, except for a shift to his wheelchair every morning while she straightened the room. His paralysis was creeping slowly toward his heart. At first, for the first year, Roxane had received the faintest answering pressure sometimes when she held his hand. Then it had gone, ceased one evening, and never came back. And through 2 nights, Roxane lay wide-eyed, staring into the dark and wondering what had gone. What fraction of his soul had taken flight? What last grain of comprehension those shattered, broken nerves still carried to the brain? After that hope died, had it not been for her unceasing care, the last spark would have gone long before. Every morning she shaved and bathed him, shifted him with her own hands from bed to chair and back to bed. She was in his room constantly, bearing medicine, straightening a pillow, talking to him, almost as one talks to a nearly human dog, without hope of response or appreciation, but with the dim persuasion of habit, a prayer when faith has gone. Not a few people, one celebrated nerve specialist among them, gave her a plain impression that it was futile to exercise so much care, that if Geoffrey had been conscious, he would have wished to die, that if his spirit were hovering in some wider air, it would agree to no such sacrifice from her. It would fret only for the prison of its body to give it full release. "But you see," she replied, shaking her head gently, "when I married Geoffrey, it was until I ceased to love him." "But," was protested in effect, "you can't love that." "I can love what it once was. What else is there for me to do?" The specialist shrugged his shoulders and went away to say that Mrs. Curtin was a remarkable woman, and just about as sweet as an angel. But, he added, it was a terrible pity. There must be some man, or a dozen, just crazy to take care of her. Casually, there were. Here and there someone began in hope and ended in reverence. There was no love in the woman except, strangely enough, for life, for the people in the world, from the tramp to whom she gave food she could ill afford to the butcher who sold her a cheap cut of steak across the meaty board. The other phase was sealed up somewhere in that expressionless mummy who lay with his face turned ever toward the light, as mechanically as a compass needle, and waited dumbly for the last wave to wash over his heart. After 11 years, he died in the middle of a May night, when the scent of the syringa hung upon the windowsill and a breeze wafted in the shrillings of the frogs and cicadas outside. Roxane awoke at 2 and realized with a start she was alone in the house at last. After that, she sat on her weather-beaten porch through many afternoons, gazing down across the fields that undulated in a slow descent to the white and green town. She was wondering what she would do with her life. She was 36, handsome, strong and free. The years had eaten up Geoffrey's insurance. She had reluctantly parted with the acres to right and left of her, and had even placed a small mortgage on the house. With her husband's death had come a great physical restlessness. She missed having to care for him in the morning. She missed her rush to town, and the brief and therefore accentuated neighbourly meetings in the butcher's and grocer's. She missed the cooking for 2, the preparation of delicate liquid food for him. One day, consumed with energy, she went out and spaded up the whole garden, a thing that had not been done for years. And she was alone at night in the room that had seen the glory of her marriage, and then the pain. To meet Jeff again, she went back in spirit to that wonderful year, that intense, passionate absorption and companionship, rather than looked forward to a problematical meeting hereafter. She awoke often to lie and wish for that presence beside her, inanimate yet breathing, still Jeff. One afternoon, 6 months after his death, she was sitting on the porch in a black dress which took away the faintest suggestion of plumpness from her figure. It was Indian summer, golden brown all about her, a hush broken by the sighing of leaves. Westward, a 4 o'clock sun, dripping streaks of red and yellow over a flaming sky. Most of the birds had gone. Only a sparrow that had built itself a nest on the cornice of a pillar kept up an intermittent cheeping, varied by occasional fluttering sallies overhead. Roxane moved her chair to where she could watch him, and her mind idled drowsily on the bosom of the afternoon. Harry Cromwell was coming out from Chicago to dinner. Since his divorce over 8 years before, he had been a frequent visitor. They had kept up what amounted to a tradition between them. When he arrived, they would go to look at Jeff. Harry would sit down on the edge of the bed and in a hearty voice ask, "Well, Jeff, old man, how do you feel today?" Roxane, standing beside, would look intently at Jeff, dreaming that some shadowy recognition of this former friend had passed across that broken mind. But the head, pale, carven, would only move slowly in its sole gesture toward the light, as if something behind the blind eyes were groping for another light long since gone out. These visits stretched over 8 years, at Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving, and on many a Sunday Harry had arrived, paid his call on Jeff, and then talked for a long while with Roxane on the porch. He was devoted to her. He made no pretense of hiding, no attempt to deepen this relation. She was his best friend, as the mass of flesh on the bed there had been his best friend. She was peace. She was rest. She was the past. Of his own tragedy, she alone knew. He had been at the funeral, but since then, the company for which he worked had shifted him to the east, and only a business trip had brought him to the vicinity of Chicago. Roxane had written him to come when he could. After a night in the city, he had caught a train out. They shook hands, and he helped her move 2 rockers together. "How's George?" "He's fine, Roxane. Seems to like school." "Of course. It was the only thing to do to send him." "Of course. You miss him horribly, Harry?" "Yes, I do miss him. He's a funny boy." He talked a lot about George. Roxane was interested. Harry must bring him out on his next vacation. She'd only seen him once in her life, a child, in dirty rompers. She left him with the newspaper while she prepared dinner. She had 4 chops tonight and some late vegetables from her own garden. She put it all on and then called him, and sitting down together they continued their talk about George. "If I had a child," she would say. Afterward, Harry having given her what slender advice he could about investments, they walked through the garden, pausing here and there to recognize what had once been a cement bench, or where the tennis court had lain. "Do you remember?" Then they were off on a flood of reminiscences. The day they'd taken all the snapshots, and Jeff had been photographed astride the calf. And the sketch Harry had made of Jeff and Roxane lying sprawled in the grass, their heads almost touching. There was to have been a covered lattice connecting the barn studio with the house, so that Jeff could get there on wet days. The lattice had been started, but nothing remained except a broken triangular piece that still adhered to the house and resembled a battered chicken coop. And those mint juleps! And Jeff's notebook! Do you remember how we'd laugh, Harry, when he'd get it out of his pocket and read aloud a page of material, and how frantic he used to get? Wild. He was such a kid about his writing. They were both silent a moment, and then Harry said, "We were to have a place out here too. Do you remember? We were to buy the adjoining 20 acres. And the parties we were going to have." Again there was a pause, broken this time by a low question from Roxanne. "Do you ever hear of her, Harry?" "Why, yes," he admitted placidly. "She's in Seattle. She's married again to a man named Horton, a sort of lumber king. He's a great deal older than she is, I believe." "And she's behaving?" "Yes. That is, I've heard so. She has everything, you see. Nothing much to do except dress up for this fellow at dinner time." "I see." Without effort, he changed the subject. "Are you going to keep the house?" "I think so," she said, nodding. "I've lived here so long, Harry, it'd seem terrible to move. I thought of trained nursing, but of course that'd mean leaving. I've about decided to be a boarding-house lady." "Live in one?" "No, keep one. Is there such an anomaly as a boarding-house lady? Anyway, I'd have a negress and keep about 8 people in the summer and 2 or 3, if I can get them, in the winter. Of course, I'll have to have the house repainted and gone over inside." Harry considered. "Roxanne, why, naturally you know best what you can do, but it does seem a shock, Roxanne. You came here as a bride." "Perhaps," she said, "that's why I don't mind remaining here, as a boarding-house lady." "I remember a certain batch of biscuits." "Oh, those biscuits!" she cried. "Still, from all I heard about the way you devoured them, they couldn't have been so bad. I was so low that day, yet somehow I laughed when the nurse told me about those biscuits. I noticed that the 12 nail holes are still in the library wall where Jeff drove them." "Yes." It was getting very dark now. A crispness settled in the air. A little gust of wind sent down a last spray of leaves. Roxanne shivered slightly. "We'd better go in." He looked at his watch. "It's late. I've got to be leaving. I go east tomorrow." "Must you?" They lingered for a moment just below the stoop, watching a moon that seemed full of snow float out of the distance where the lake lay. Summer was gone, and now Indian summer. The grass was cold, and there was no mist and no dew. After he left, she would go in and light the gas and close the shutters, and he would go down the path and on to the village. To these two, life had come quickly and gone, leaving not bitterness, but pity, not disillusion, but only pain. There was already enough moonlight when they shook hands, for each to see the gathered kindness